The Permian period, a time period most people know little to nothing about. It was the last time period of the Paleozoic era, and came right before the age of the dinosaurs, and the fauna of the Permian is often overshadowed by the dinosaurs. So today I will be talking all about the early Permian, and the animals that lived during that time. So let's start the intro. First of all, let me introduce you to Viserys. He is my son, and has appeared on this channel a few times before, but from now on, he will be a contributing member of my videos.
Hey guys, it's me, Viserys.
Okay, now let's get some general information about the Permian out of the way. The Permian was from about 299 to 252 million years ago. This was when the supercontinent Pangaea was around. All the major continents were connected into one large landmass. There were two main bodies of water during the early Permian, the Paleotethys Ocean and the Paleotethys Seaway. Also during the early Permian, the world was in an ice age, which will be very important later on. As for the animals, there were two main groups on land, the synapsids and the sauropsids. Sauropsida is the group that includes most reptiles.
Like me.
Yes, like you. And birds. Birds would evolve after the Permian though. The synapsids are a bit more complicated though. They were the dominant group during the Permian, and their descendants would eventually evolve into us mammals. Just think of them as another group of animals, like mammals or reptiles. The main way to tell them apart from each other is their skull. Synapsids and today's mammals have one hole behind their eye socket. The sauropsids, like Viserys, have 0 or 2 holes behind their eye socket. So now that I have that general information out of the way, I will talk about some of the animals that lived during the early Permian. Now there are two main places I would like to focus on, the Paleotethys Seaway and Euramerica. First, let's talk about the Paleotethys Seaway. For the most part, it was similar to today's oceans, but there are three creatures that lived there that I would like to mention. First is the trilobites. They were a class of arthropods. They were some of the first animals, and lived all the way from the Precambrian to the end of the Permian.
Wow, that's a long time.
It sure is, Viserys. The trilobites ranged in size from this big to about this big. They were carnivores. They had 3 lobes on their back, which gives them their name. It was a simple body structure, but it was very effective. The next animal is the Eurypterids, or the sea scorpions. They were an order of arthropods. They lived all the way from the Ordovician to the end of the Permian.
That's also a long time.
It is, Viserys. The Eurypterids could get to 8 feet or 2.5 meters long, but most of them were only about this big. They were carnivores, and were even apex predators before the Permian.
But what could have possibly overthrown these monsters from the role of apex predator?
Well, it's a good thing you asked, Viserys. Let me introduce you to Helicoprion. They were about 20 to 25 feet long, or 6 to 8 meters long. These guys were the apex predators of the Permian Ocean. You have probably noticed that buzzsaw jaw of theirs. It did not move like a buzzsaw. They instead used it to cut and slash through their prey. When scientists first discovered Helicoprion, they did not know exactly where the tooth spiral sat on their body. Because shark bodies are mainly made out of cartilage, which does not fossilize well, some of these scientists placed the tooth spiral on the dorsal or the tail fin. I don't know what they were smoking when they came to this conclusion, but today we are pretty sure it was on their lower jaw, even though they looked like sharks, and filled the same ecological niche as modern-day sharks. They were not true sharks. They were instead ratfish, which is a group that is distantly related to sharks. So now let's leave the Paleotethys Seaway and move on to Euramerica. I chose this area because it is where the most famous animals from the early Permian lived, and most of my viewers live their modern day. During the early Permian, what is now North America and Europe was covered in vast swamps and forests, an environment similar to the modern-day Florida Everglades, with more desert environments closer to the mountains. The Appalachian and Atlas Mountains were both part of the same mountain range, the Central Pangean mountain range, and it was much taller than it is today. Comparable in height to the modern-day Rocky Mountains. To the northeast, the Ural Mountains were just starting to form. They were comparable in height to the modern-day Appalachian Mountains. So like last video, I think the best and most fun way to teach you guys will be to take you on a virtual safari through early Permian Euro-America. So take a seat in the safari car and let's set off.
Let's go!
Now to your right, you can see a herd of Edaphosaurus. They were a genus of synapsid. They were about 11.5 feet, or 3.5 meters long. They were herbivores. As you have probably noticed, they had a sail on their back. Their sails could have been used to attract mates, and or to regulate their body temperature. Let me explain that. So if Edaphosaurus stood in a sunny area, and pumped blood into their sail, the sun would warm up the blood, thus keeping the Edaphosaurus warm. Now let's continue on. If you look at the left side, you can see Eriops. They were a genus of amphibian. They could get to 7 feet or 2 meters long, but they were usually 5 feet or 1.5 meters long. They were carnivores. They were semi-aquatic and were very similar to modern-day crocodiles. Now let's continue on. To your left you can see Cotylohynchus. They were a genus of synapsid. They were 20 feet or 6 meters long. They were the largest synapsid of the early Permian. As far as we know, they were herbivores. They were semi-aquatic and were similar to modern-day hippos. Now let's continue on. If you look at the right side, you can see Tadiohistrix. They were a genus of amphibian. They were about 1 meter or 3.3 feet long. They were omnivores. They had a sail on their back, like Edaphosaurus. Many Permian animals had sails on their backs. Now let's continue on. To your left, you can see a herd of Desmododon. They were a genus of synapsid. They were about 10 feet or 3 meters long. They were herbivores, but there's something hunting these creatures. It's Dimetrodon, probably the most famous genus of synapsid. They ranged from the size of a cat to 15 feet or 4.5 meters long. They were apex predators of Permian Euro-America. This is the synapsid that is most often mistaken as being a dinosaur or reptile. Like I said before, synapsids were their own group of animals. Their sails would have been used for the same uses as a Edaphosaurus' sail, to attract mates and or to regulate body temperature. Now let's continue on. If you look at the left side, you can see Diplocalus. They were a genus of amphibian. They were about 5 feet or 1.5 meters long. They were carnivores. Their skull looks like a boomerang, probably because it created lift in the water. Now let's continue on. To your left you can see Estiminosaucus. They were a genus of synapsid. They ranged from 5 feet or 1.5 meters tall to 6.5 feet or 2 meters tall. They were herbivores. They had bony projections on their skulls. The smaller species had more pronounced projections. They most likely used them for display to attract mates. Like Cotylohynchus, they were semi-aquatic and were similar to modern-day hippos. Now let's continue on. To your left, you can see Titanophonius. They were a genus of synapsid. They were about the size of a large tiger. They were apex predators of the more mountainous areas of Euro-America. Now let's continue on. This will be our last stop before we end the trip. If you look to your right, you can see Biarmasuchus. They were a genus of synapsid. They were about the size of a dog. They were carnivores. They were probably semi-nocturnal. Now believe it or not, but during the early Permian, these guys were our ancestors. Their descendants would eventually evolve into us. But in nature, nothing lasts forever.
Oh no.
Like I said at the beginning of the video, during the early Permian, the world was in an ice age. Well, at the end of the middle Permian, the world would start to warm, and the glaciers started to melt. You would think this wouldn't change much, because the world would get hotter, but there would be more water to go around. But it did not work out like that. When Pangaea formed, mountains pushed up where the continents met, and those mountains were still growing. And because of the rain shadow effect, which is when mountains block moisture from reaching the other side of the mountains, the new water from the melting glaciers was not able to make it to the interior of Pangaea. This caused flooding in the coastal forests, and desertification in the interior of the continent. 2/3 of life on Earth became extinct as a result of this. Now you can probably see why I decided to split the Permian period into 2 videos. Because the early and late Permian are very different from each other. So in a few weeks, we will learn what life lived during the late Permian period. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when that video comes out.
And we will see you guys next time. Bye!
Even now, the evil seed of what you have done germinates within you.